We're on issue 6.
We are now on issue 6, yes, which is the Northern California Reentry Facility Capital Outlay BCP.
Madam Chair, Steve Benson with the Department of Finance. Just to address the questions that were being gendered briefly, we felt that the Recidivism Reduction Fund was an appropriate source of this because the programs that would be being run at this facility are geared towards the reentry program, which we talk about a lot. It has a lot of recidivism reduction programming in it. And so this BCP, this proposal, is really about providing appropriate facilities to support that type of programming. And that's why we felt that it was appropriate to use that source.
Thank you. LAO?
Sure, I'll be very brief since we did talk about this a little bit in the last hearing. Our primary concern is that I think we would disagree that this is an appropriate use of that recidivism reduction fund. We would believe the legislative intent was to actually support programs rather than the design of facilities, albeit ones that may be delivering programs in the future. We are also concerned with the cost of the proposal. There's no details at this point, but a previous proposal came in at about $115 million to construct the facility, and in addition about $90,000 per inmate to operate, which is substantially more expensive than the average cost. It's about $60,000 for other inmates in CDCR prisons. So happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions or comments from members of the committee? And is there public comment?
Jim Lindbergh on behalf of the Friends Committee on Legislation in California. We strongly agree with the LAO that recidivism reduction funds should not be used to finance facilities and so forth at capacity that should go into programming. Thank you.
Okay. I have just one question for the administration, and that is when you have a women's prison that's over 180 at over 180% of capacity, and you have a facility that was designed as a women's prison and shut down, why are you not considering this as a potential women's facility?
Martin Hoshino, Undersecretary for Operations. I think the short answer to your question is it should be part of the discussion of the various options that are out there to deal with the crowding level that we have at CCWF. It joins the other options. I think I've previously testified and described the McFarland 1 facility, which will provide some relief. We're also looking at the possible expansion of the Folsom Women's Facility. We recently toured a facility in Coalinga. We also have been already talking about reentry or enhanced alternative custody programs for females. This also can provide relief. I think the question that you've asked, the heart of it, it should fit in that entire kind of comprehensive discussion we should have of whatever the policy options or choices are. And I would suggest that neither of us begin to lock in on a particular solution. We also have different proposals coming from different providers out there that also provide relief. So there's about 6 or 7 things that are on the board, so to speak. And there's no reason why the notion of the NCRF being I guess, reactivated. It is its former mission, shouldn't be part of that discussion. I would just be cautious that it is competing with maybe what could be community-based solutions for the same problem of 182% at CCWF.
Your response doesn't address the issue of the population of women who are in segregated housing units just because we have no other place to keep them safely. And so how would you address that issue? Because I don't think the community options and what you've said applies to those women.
Yeah, correct. That becomes part of the discussion, I think. NCWF does provide celled environments that could assist with that particular issue. However, is the need as great as 400 to 600 cells? It should be part of the discussion. I think we have to debate and I think analyze that a little bit better. I know that facility, been to that facility a number of times in its dormant state. I just think that there's a better mix perhaps out there, and we can get into that as we proceed in the coming months.
Okay. But that conversation is yet to be had. We don't see options before us today as we consider this BCP or this budget.
Yeah, I think the notion of crowding at the female level and the fact that the population didn't drop at the level we thought, we find ourselves in a place revisiting the assumptions of realignment, blueprint, et cetera. But I think we've all concluded we have to have more relief at the female level. And so, we have, in the last month or so, tried to accelerate our options. This is actually why we already began proposing reentry, with female reentry being at the foremost of that. Again, it's also why we asked for and argued for and would like authority for the enhanced alternative custody program, because that provides relief. And then this particular facility, I think, joins that discussion.
Yeah, it's $8.3 million for planning.
I was trying to remember the numbers, what they told us at the previous hearing about how many women.
The new okay.
It was,
That was about
50 to 80. 80 would
50
be
to
the
80.
maximum in San Diego.
Yeah. And I would point out that programs such as that could be funded with $8.3 million. You know, I have thought about this a lot, and I would entertain a motion that we reject the proposal and the associated trailer bill language as an inappropriate use of the recidivism reduction fund. That we also direct the administration to work with experts to determine whether or not a public-private partnership with a nonprofit organization would be possible that would allow the facility to be repurposed in a more timely manner as a facility for female inmates that could provide promising and innovative programming and a special needs yard for female inmates who are currently being held in administrative segregation, i.e. solitary confinement, due to concerns for their safety in the general population. And knowing the mental health consequences of that kind of segregated confinement, it would seem that we should at least explore this possibility of a public-private partnership that could do that, and I believe there are several of those that have expressed interest.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make that motion. I'd also like to just quickly add that while I agree with the goals, and I want to make sure there's more room for female inmates, it can't come from those funds. Those funds have to be preserved so that people have a fighting chance to return to society. So for that reason, I'm making the motion.
Thank you. Please call the roll.
Madam Chair,
Aye.
Senator Anderson, Senator Mitchell. Motion passes.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Senator Anderson. I hope you catch your plane. The last item on our agenda is a status update on the reentry hubs. Thank you, Ms. Tidwell. Welcome again.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Millicent Tidwell, the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I wanted to give you an update on where we are on implementation of our reentry hubs. I know that you have a chart in the agenda for your viewing pleasure. So I'll just get started. With the ledge approval of the blueprint in May of 2012, the department has increased the percentage of number of inmates served in our rehabilitation programs, and for all intents and purposes, will meet our goal of programming 70% of the department's target population prior to their release. In working towards meeting that goal, the department has established reentry hubs to concentrate on pre-release programs that prepare inmates about to return to their communities. Reentry hubs will provide relevant services to inmates who are within 4 years of release and who demonstrate a willingness to maintain appropriate behavior to take advantage of such programming. More specifically, our inmate eligibility for transfer to the reentry hubs is based on time left to serve, the California Static Risk Assessment Score, the Correctional Offender Management Profiling for Alternative Sanctions, the COMPASS indicator, and lack of additional felony or immigration and customs enforcement aka ICE holds. The reentry hubs have been designated to provide housing, rehabilitative programming, enhanced academic and vocational education opportunities, pre-employment transition services, access to the California identification card, in a designated yard within 13 institutions. Components of the programs consist of substance abuse treatment, cognitive behavioral treatment programs geared towards addressing criminal thinking, anger management, and family relationships. The substance abuse treatment programming component focuses on those inmates assessed through the COMPASS assessment tool and have a criminogenic need for substance abuse treatment, and for those within 6 to 12 months left to serve. Research shows that offenders with a need for substance abuse treatment programming who receive substance abuse treatment in prison, followed by aftercare services upon release to parole, recidivate at approximately 35% lower than the 65% recidivism rates. I'm going to get a little reverb. Okay, I got both. The academic programs that are available in reentry hubs are provided by the department and include adult basic education programs, general education development, preparation and testing, and preparation for an offender to receive a high school diploma. Academic education programs focus on inmates within 13 to 48 months left to serve, and our career technical education programs are provided by the department and focus on inmates within 13 to 48 months left to serve as well. We recognize that one of our greatest barriers to an offender's successful reintegration into society is their ability to find employment. Included in the services available in the reentry hubs is a pre-employment transitions program. The services include job readiness skills as well as linkages to one-stop career centers and other social service agencies in the offender's county of last legal residence. These services will be primarily available during the last 6 months of prison time so that we can make sure that we're making those community connections upon release. Volunteer education programs are also available to offenders to provide access to college courses and degree programs. The department is also partnered with the California Department of Motor Vehicles and to assist the eligible inmates in obtaining state-issued identification cards, which will be available to offenders upon release. So far, we've issued over 1,500 or so of those IDs statewide. Reentry hub locations were selected based upon a number of criteria, including the demographics of the institution's projected population after realignment, with 4 years or less to serve, and the availability of adequate programming space and their demonstrated ability to effectively utilize rehabilitative programs. So the reentry hubs that we have up and running since September in 2013 is at the California Women's Facility at CCWF, California Men's Colony, the California Institution for Women, and Ironwood State Prison. 8 more reentry hubs location sites were awarded in February, and we're working, and those are in various stages of contract preparation and staff training, and those are at Avenal State Prison, California Institution for Men, the Correctional Training Facility, Chuckawalla Valley State Prison, Folsom Women's Facility, High Desert State Prison, the Substance Abuse Treatment Facility, and Valley State Prison. The contract for our California State Prison in Los Angeles, we expect to have awarded, if not prior to, but by June 2014. The one contractor that bid on that particular site did not meet the minimum qualifications for the proposal and had to be submitted for rebid through the Department of General Services contracting structure. We are considering the availability of the 3-judge panel waiver on how we may be able to do some direct contracting for that particular site under the reentry hubs. Program outcomes are closely monitored by our department and our division in particular to determine the effectiveness of the reentry hubs in comparison with the results prior to realignment. Key performance indicators that we utilize include program enrollment, attendance, completion, and as well as regression. The key performance indicators are reviewed monthly by executive staff, and the results are shared with the wardens and institutional program staff in order to address immediate trends that are identified through program implementation. Quarterly meetings are conducted with institution staff to discuss performance in all of these areas, and significant improvement, especially in enrollment rates, has been made as a result of the reviews. So as we continue to implement the programs, it's very important to keep a very close eye on new contracts. So if anyone has any questions about the particulars, we'd be happy to answer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a quick question with regard to the Cal ID program because it came up at the town hall. I told you that I co-convened this week. You mentioned that you've issued 1,500 over the past, I don't know if it's past year or since the program started. My question is 1,500 out of how many releases? Because out of 90 minutes of audience Q&A, I can't tell you how many times the issue came up about folks not being able to get their California ID prior to release and what a barrier it was. And so, you know, the general public was asking for help with DMV, didn't quite know who needed to address it. So 1,500 out of how many releases? 1,500 sounds great, but if it's out of 5,000 releases, maybe not so much.
The program's just getting started.
Okay.
The contract just began, I don't remember, I think it was November of last year. I can get the specifics about the numbers of out of how many, but it's just ramping up. We've intend to have ongoing meetings with just the DMV, met with their new deputy director who's heading up an expanded effort and looking at how we can improve our processes, but it is just ramping up. So I'll be happy to keep you informed about it.
Please, well, just know at the community level, at least, you know, in one city district out of the entire state, it's perceived as a problem.
And
and the perception is that the bill passed, it's the law, therefore we should have access. So I appreciate ramp up time and what have you. But the community perception is we're not getting access to this critical tool we need to be able to access so many other critical services, to be able to enroll in job training programs and all the various things we know that you've got to have ID to be able to make happen. So that was the problem.
And we are working under the eligibility criteria as set forth by the Department of Motor Vehicles. So that is, you know, I don't want to say constrictive, but
I think that you may need to call the DMV. Actually, let me ask a question about that. Did we actually finally pass a law that got signed by the governor to do this, or is this internal to the department? I ask because I carried a bill for at least 2 years that was always vetoed at the end. And then CDCR was going to do a pilot program to see if they could do it, but then the DMV didn't cooperate. And then I thought we just kind of heard that all of a sudden it was adopted internally and CDCR was going to do it. So I'm a little surprised that we're just ramping up now because, again, it creates a pattern of always getting ready to change, never changing. And I have great confidence that this is a new era and things are going to be different. But is there actually a law, or are we really just ramping up now? And will we hear in a couple of months that we're ramped, the DMV is on board, or do we need to do something with the DMV? Because we're here to back you in making this happen.
Well, it was an internal effort, and we're working very closely with DMV. They're very engaged in working with us and in our successes as we move forward. But it is an interagency agreement that we have with the Department of Motor Vehicles in internal efforts.
Okay, right. So there you have
The
it.
advocacy organization that you worked with who said, oh, the law passed. The individual residents came up and said, we've got this law, we can't get it, but that's...
Yeah. No, it's a huge barrier.
Right.
And we all know that the early days of release are the critical times for people when if they can't get a job, if they can't get a place to stay, they end up
Exactly.
re-victimizing someone.
Right.
And I'm so glad that you're working on it, and we will want, I think, more information as we move into the May revised period and everything. Because if you need more money, if you need something like that, tell us. We want this to happen. We really do. And
Thank you, Senator. We'll keep you informed about the process.
yeah, thank you. I was just interested in what you said about Lancaster, that you got a contract, the only bidder was not really appropriate. I would be interested in knowing a little bit more about the reasons for that, simply because we're interested in contracting. And I know that we have some private prisons gearing up and everything. And then we're reading that other states have actually broken contracts with some of those contractors because they weren't doing a good job. So was this, let me put it this way, would this be a contractor who might have been looking more creatively but didn't pass the strict muster that they would need? Or would this be a for-profit business that's been doing this a long time and just don't have a good track record?
I'll let Deputy Director Meyer answer the question.
Madam Chair, in our contracts, we had made one of the minimum requirements is a contractor who has previous experience with providing substance abuse to an incarcerated population. The one contractor who did bid on the Lancaster contract has never provided an in-custody substance abuse program, which is unique in the delivery of that program. And so they had bid on several of our contracts. They were disqualified, and DGS upheld that disqualification.
Oh, okay, thank you. That's helpful. That tells me what the general direction. I noticed that there are a number of reentry hubs waiting for DGS approval. I just wondered if you could tell me how long that contracting process takes in general, and is there anything that we could do to expedite or streamline, as we were discussing with the previous, overlapping reports? Because we are interested in being as efficient as possible.
I'll do my best to be brief. We've been working closely with Division of Rehabilitative Programs, and there are, for major contracts, there's a couple routes that we can go. One, I will, using your words, describe as the more creative route, request for proposal. It's a longer process by definition because it's more open-ended. The other opportunity is to go to invitation for bids, where we are much more specific and defined in what we are looking for, and that's probably a 4 to 6 month process. With the contracts that we're talking about, we originally started down the more open-ended route, not wanting to presume that we had all of the answers, trying to be creative. We ended up with a number of protests at the end of the process, and in the interest of coming back and getting services in place quickly, we switched back to the other more specific proposal. So that's sort of the high level of the two. There is a lot of time in both processes. That is the time taken internally to review, or the time taken by DGS to review either the bids or the protests, various pieces along the way. We're working very closely with the Department of General Services, and in regards to the last round, we've actually had them on shorter time frames than they're allowed to move our processes along. So I think that that's a productive relationship. We're already moving forward contingent upon the legislative approval of our 14-15 contracts to have all of those in place so that we're not waiting until the next year. And we're using this time now as the lead time, since we've got models and we've already procured them, to get them in place. So I think we're in a good spot. Having said that, we are looking at what's occurring in other states and how they structure their procurements to be more time efficient. We're also working with our program colleagues, looking at what happens in education and where they have the ability to direct purchase curriculum or those kinds of things without going through a bid process. So we are looking at those models, and if we have suggestions, either from our own or out of our work with the Department of General Services, where we're getting their input on perhaps looking at increased use of leverage procurements where either California or other states have master agreements in place, or looking at increased delegation for our department to move forward on things we've demonstrated we can move forward on quickly and effectively and in process. We'll bring back ideas if we have those.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to add to that. On the chart that you're looking at where it says pending DGS approval, they have 10 days to respond on these particular items. And where we're saying that they're going to be within 45 to 60 days is where we have staff hired, trained, and start moving people into those slots.
Okay, that's great. And I want to just, I think this is something we're going to want to pursue, both in the interest of efficiency, but also the interest of getting innovative programs from nimble organizations and not being stuck in the same rut all the time. And just a few months ago, some of us were at a hearing about the IT problems the state has, the constant overruns and systems that crash. And we heard from several young entrepreneurs, one of whom, and this is not a partisan comment, this is an IT comment, was the Californian who had engineered the Obama social media computer networks that were judged in a bipartisan way as being so very effective in political campaigns. And he said the problem is you could never apply for a state contract because the state contracts are so rigidly composed that only the major companies have the financial wherewithal to fill out the application, to see it through, and to meet the qualifications for prior contracts. We had some of the largest firms in the world got hundreds of millions of dollars in contracts for state of California computers that had to be pulled in the end, like the judiciary, and other contracts because those companies, in fact, could not perform. And it was suggested that the state might want to start small, like instead of the full-blown system, you ask for certain things that you want, get some of the nimbler companies and try to make it work and then expand instead of the way we've been doing it, which has been quite manifestly not working. I would say the same thing with some of these contracts. Is there a way for us not to necessarily go with a large nationwide purveyor that may have a spotty track record if we could look for local innovations, start small, and see where we go? Now, I mean, Lancaster Prison is a different thing, but I'm interested in what the break, what happened, and as we go forward, as we look at more community-based facilities, how do we actually, how do we get the kind of program we heard about this morning, running a program, because we might get much better results, and have to start somewhere. So, having said that, just one last question. Are you planning to have what they're calling now in-reach services at all the reentry hubs? And how are you going to make that work when at least in Northern California, there's 2 reentry hubs, one's in Chico, one's in Susanville. Nothing is at all close to the Bay Area, so how would any of that work?
Madam Chair, currently we already have in-reach programs that do come in. So in our current substance abuse programs, many of them that will become actual reentry hub programs, we have provider fairs that go on. And so we have community-based providers who do the programs in the community, come in and talk to the participants, because a large portion of our participants are going out to probation, out on probation release to be supervised. The county probation departments have now joined in, and they will come in on these provider fairs. At the female institutions, we have specific female community programs that come in and talk about their services to get the participants willing to, when they get out, go into these programs. So this is something we have been already doing in our programs.
It is part of our contracting, or it is in the contract to provide that continuity of care. I don't think we've necessarily specifically called it in reach before, but it is something that is happening.
That's great, thank you. I also, just in ending, want to note that in the OIG report, they said that there is in process a interagency agreement so that we can bring art education back to prisons. And I just want to say, from everything we know, that's very conducive to rehabilitation. And I like the idea of doing a contract. What is it, with the Arts Council?
Yes, we have an interagency agreement with the California Arts Council, and we're actually meeting with them tomorrow. Looked at today, but not tomorrow, and talking about the specifics of how we move forward. But it is an interagency agreement that we are solidifying as we speak.
Well, thank you for that. There's been enormous interest expressed.
Yes.
Everywhere on that. I think that's a great step forward. Are there any comments or questions? No, Senator Mitchell, you already asked.
I did, thank you.
Is there any public comment on the reentry status update? Seeing and hearing none, I think we've reached the end of our agenda. I want to thank you all very, very much.